Thank you, Naima. So I'm afraid I'm one of the small group of people who have fallen victim to tummy troubles this morning. So I want you to know that if I leave the room suddenly, it's nothing that you've said. So this morning now, you can put on my slide now. This morning I want you to, I'm going to invite you to think about chronic disease in a different way. I'm going to ask you to put aside the idea of the simillimum this morning. I'm going to ask you to put aside the idea of the miasms. Put that aside as well. That is not to say those things are not crucially important. Of course they are. I'm just going to ask you to put those aside for this morning. So I'm going to invite you to look at chronic disease in a different way today.
Sorry, John, which one are we looking at?
Have I got two? Have I?
You've got a folder with 15.
Oh,
diabetes, endocrine. Endocrine 2.
Yeah. Are you in the Bali folder? Or the Bali project folder?
That's it. That's up there. It's up there. He's covered.
And, yeah. So if that's in the Bali folder, it's the current one. I think endocrine 2 is fine, yeah. Now, as Naima told you, my very first training was not in homeopathy, it was in osteopathy. Now, the original osteopaths, established by Dr. Andrew Taylor Still in the 1880s, were not the osteopaths you see today. Today, when you go to your osteopath, you go because you've got a sore neck or a sore back or a headache. But in the 1880s, the osteopaths were looking at treating organic disease through osteopathic principles. So the most important principle in the 1880s that they established was this. It's very simple but very profound. Structure governs function. Structure governs function. And that means if you lose your structural integrity, you then lose your functional integrity. Once you lose your functional integrity, that's the beginning of disease. So I'm going to ask you to have two pictures in your mind today as I go through these cases. The first picture is this one, talking about structure. Think about this building that we're sitting in. It's a beautiful building, a lovely grand entrance, stairway, beautiful curved roof line, nice open space. It's a lovely building, yeah? But none of us have crawled underneath the building and looked at the foundations. We don't know what the foundations are like. So the most important part of this building is not what you see, it is what you don't see. It is the foundations. And if your foundations lose their structural integrity, or even worse, if you are missing some foundations, this building is always going to be wobbly. It's always going to have an impeded structure. So I want you to think about the human body in exactly the same way. This is the first picture I want you to have in your mind. The foundations of the human body are vitally important if we consider that structure governs function. So what are the foundations of the human body? I'm talking about the elements, or more colloquially speaking, the minerals. The elements. So that's the first picture I want you to hold in your head as I go through my presentation this morning. The second picture I'll come to, it's a little bit more in depth than the first one. So let's just start with this one, endocrine disorders. Let's see if this is working today. So my interest in endocrine disorders began over a decade ago with this lady called Fatima, who had Graves' disease. This was the first time I'd ever tried to treat thyrotoxicosis, Graves' disease. And she had all the classic symptoms of thyrotoxicosis. She had claustrophobia, heat intolerance, fatigue, anxiety. She had a noticeable goiter. She had a tremor, when she held her hands out. She had this shake, which you get with thyrotoxicosis. Fatigue, She had nausea and headaches. She got thirst, restlessness, palpitations, and she had this right-sided pain in the iliac fossa. Many of these things are standard symptoms you're going to see in Graves' disease. They're all pretty much the same, pretty generic. Now, normally in Australia, if you've got Graves' disease, you're going to go to your doctor and be prescribed a drug called neomeprazole, I think, from memory. Is that right? The reason why she came to see me instead of doing that was because she wanted to have a baby. She had one child already, and she wanted to have a second child, and you can't take that drug while you're pregnant. So all she wanted for me was to try and stabilise her thyroid condition so she could have her baby, get pregnant and have a baby. So all her symptoms were a pretty clear case for iodine, which I gave in the 200C potency. It cured all symptoms very quickly, completely symptom-free. And all her blood results returned to normal as well. So when you're treating thyrotoxicosis, you want to see not only improvement in symptoms, you want to see the bloods agreeing with that too. Yeah, so all her bloods returned to normal. So I was yelling from the rooftops. This was my very first Graves' disease case, and I thought, gee, that's pretty easy. The case is cured. Or so I thought, anyway.
Two pose?
Okay. Now, let me just walk you through this for a second. I'll just come over here a bit so I can see too. This is going to work, isn't it? So, you can see the TSH has returned to normal. So the first TSH is low, which you see in Graves' disease, and her T3 is high. Yeah? I just want my glasses. I'm sorry this is not very clear to you, but in 2004, you can see this is when I was treating her, and within a few months, the same year, all her bloods have returned to normal. See this? And from 2004 right up until 2008, she remained what I thought was cured. But in 2008, there was a sudden relapse. You can see how the bloods are going crazy. Very low TSH, extremely high T3, T4. So then everything I tried failed. More doses of iodine were ineffective. I tried various different kinds of potencies. I tried constitutional prescribing. I tried miasmatic prescribing. Everything failed. No symptoms would be touched again. So what I thought was a cured case relapsed after those 4 years. But she was happy. She'd had her baby by then, and then she went on the allopathic route for her treatment. So as far as she was concerned, she was happy. Huh?
Too hard?
Maybe just a blank slide in that middle.
What?
Maybe you got a blank slide in the middle.
Maybe I did. Oh. Oh, God. Okay, so what did I learn from this case? What I learned was there's more I need to understand about treating chronic disease, in particular endocrine diseases. There's something else that I haven't yet seen that I need to be able to discover or to see. Yeah, that's good.
Next.
Yeah? Something else, either an obstacle to cure or a fundamental cause I have not yet seen. So I need a new way of looking at these chronic cases which have a pathology like thyrotoxicosis. Okay? That's what I thought after this case. Now let's sweep forward 1 decade to this case. This is a decade later. So here we have a very typical case you'll see in all of your practices. A woman with fatigue, restless sleep, waking unrefreshed, always having colds, headaches at period time, very severe heavy bleeding with her periods, and long history of iron deficiency because of that. Nausea, irritability, and she's always cold. So her case was repertorised out as a sepia case, which is what I gave. Once again, all symptoms improved over the next year. However, there was still a problem with her heavy periods, so I gave, in addition to sepia, flaspi, bursa pectoralis, anyway, shepherd's purse, 30C, which improved the heavy bleeding. So, even though sepia improved the symptoms in this case markedly, the patient was not cured. The next thing that happened to her was she choked on a prawn, and apparently she had some kind of anaphylactic reaction to that prawn and was rushed to hospital. And since then she developed a phobia around eating and swallowing. So anytime she had any solid food, she would get anxious with the feeling of a lump in the throat. So I gave her Moscus for that symptom, Moscus 10N, which helped her symptoms. However, she was still having some difficulty swallowing. So then she began having heartburn. So her doctor prescribed a proton pump inhibitor, Nexium, and diagnosed GORD, gastroesophageal reflux disease. But the swallowing symptoms continued, so I tried Ignatia. Ignatia improved the symptoms, but still she was not cured. They were still in the background. So all her presenting symptoms were better. Her swallowing problem was better, but nothing was completely 100% cured. So we tried more sepia over quite a long period of time. But then once again, the sepia seemed to be reduced in its effectiveness over time. So what next? More sepia, more Ignatia. What do I do next? Was my conundrum. So now, on Monday we were talking about this first page of the Organon. I can't recall who was talking about it. Was it Scylla? We have to think about that first page of the Organon. I think we often rush to find the right remedy and forget about the first page. Aphorism 3 talks about identifying what is to be cured, which means what are we actually treating? What is the fundamental cause underpinning this disease? And secondly, we have to recognise obstacles to cure. Yeah? So fundamental causes, or looking at the foundations of the building, if you like, and recognising if there are obstacles to cure. So I referred her for thyroid assessment because she had this ongoing difficulty swallowing, she had recurring colds still, she had always feeling cold, and she had headaches. So here's her thyroid bloods. Now you can see, oh that's good, that's the cholesterol in it. So you can see, even though her TSH is still within range, over time, from 2003 onwards, you can see gradually it's creeping up from 1 in 2003 to 2.9 in 2011. So it's gradually creeping up closer to outside the reference ranges. So we can see there's pressure on her thyroid system just by looking at that, even though clinically speaking the doc would say, no, your thyroid's fine. Her symptoms suggest it's not fine. And then finally, in April last year, the TSH finally goes outside the reference range, so all of a sudden the doctor says, oh, you've got a thyroid disorder. And you can see thyroid antibodies are present, so we have to start thinking about Hashimoto's disease, right? So that's what the situation is. So all those symptoms we thought were anxiety occasioned by her swallowing that prawn and having that reaction, it was more to it than that. There's an underlying pathology, which in this case is a thyroid disorder. So we can say quite conclusively from this case, early signs of hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's can be seen long before they manifest in blood tests, right? It's like, I think in the old days of medicine, the doctor would take the presenting symptoms for his diagnosis. But today, the blood tests rule the roost. If the bloods are fine, then the patient should be fine, as far as the doctor is concerned. So now, we want to investigate fundamental causes and obstacles to cure. We can say that homeopathic remedies are beneficial in this case, but we need to explore the foundational causes of the illness. Okay? Certainly we've improved the patient, but there's still something not right. So how do we explore that? So there are 3 legs holding up the stool, right? Now these are different legs to the ones that you're used to. Here are my 3 legs that I always look for when I'm treating a chronic case. Toxicity, deficiency, and infection. Now we already know about infections. Homeopaths love getting down, getting dirty with their miasms, let's face it. We love miasms, which are basically infections, right? Miasms are infections. But today we're going to talk about the first 2 legs on that stool, which is toxicity and deficiency. And these are the foundations of the building we're going to look at today. So what I'm going to say is that most endocrine disorders arise from these 2 things, from toxicity and deficiency. And when you have one of these things, you always have the other. That come as a pair. They're inseparable. How do we investigate toxicity and deficiency? Well, now I'm using a specialised pathology test I'm going to show you. We use a liver scan, which Linda Hansen mentioned on Monday, which is a science called spectrophotometry. And what we're doing is we're looking inside the human body, just below the skin, through the hand, with a special little camera, which can photograph or can record the resonance of each of the elements as they exist inside that person's body. We don't need a tissue biopsy, we don't need a blood test. We just look inside with this camera, and it shows us all of the elements. It shows us the foundations of the building, the things we don't normally see. And many of these elements you don't see in blood tests. So it's a very different way of looking into the body than looking at blood tests. So this is the camera. You just hold it against the hand. There's no radiation, there's no needles involved. It's completely harmless to the patient, non-invasive. And it gives us a complete assay of the patient's elements and minerals. Now, I'm just going to show you this first. So here we have the first panel of results you get when you use the silica scan. And of course we're talking about all the good foundations. So these are all your foundations, from calcium right down through the sulfur, things you want to have in your body for good health, for good structure. Let's just start with calcium as an example. So the next column along from calcium gives you the result numerically, 459 in this case. And that's compared with the reference ranges here. So you want your calcium to be somewhere between 279 and 598, yeah? But the best way to get the picture is looking at this graph. So this line that says OK, that runs right down here, is this line in the middle of the reference range. I'm sorry my hand is so shaky, it's because of my tummy, I think. I haven't got a thyroid condition, as far as I know anyway. So with your calcium, you can see it's just to the right side of the line. And when you find a mineral going this way, it means high or going into excess. And when you have one going this way, to the left side, like the magnesium, it means low or deficient. So as long as the minerals fall in this normal zone here, you get a green colour. See all the greens? When you fall into deficiency or excess, you get a yellow colour. And once those deficiencies or excesses become critical, you get a red colour. So red means this is getting pretty serious, do something now, right? There's a serious problem with the foundations. Now, the elements, as I've said to you already, are the foundations of the building, the foundations of the body. But they also have to exist in relationship with one another. So we have to look at the elements holistically, not just one in isolation. And there's a subtle dance between the elements that I'm going to show you a bit later. So just going back one slide. This is the key for this patient's hypothyroid condition. Just here. Now, even though we're looking at the beneficial elements, there's also a picture of toxicity within these beneficial elements. Because copper, which is an important nutrient in the body, when it becomes excess, it starts causing trouble. It does many, many things, and I'll come to that a bit later on this morning. But one of the things it can do is affect your thyroid. And what it loves to do is disturb your zinc metabolism. So this patient has not been taking any zinc tablets, and yet here she has zinc critically in excess. How can that be? That's the clue to this case. So the copper, when it gets excess, pushes all the zinc out of the organs where they're needed, where it's needed, including the thyroid, pushes all the zinc out to the periphery, to the hand in this case, which is why the zinc looks so high. It's called a zinc blockade. So all the zinc is trying to get into the organs to do its job. Zinc is necessary for good thyroid function, but it can't get in because the copper is blocking it. This is the clue for this case. So how's the treatment now? What am I going to do? So the homeopathic remedy now to treat the foundational problem is copper chelate. And I'm going to explain what this is a bit later. It's a special potency called a cuprum. And what it's going to do is it's going to bring down and normalise that high copper. At the same time, I'm going to give a zinc supplement, because we know that zinc is essential for T4, T3 conversion. So if you don't have zinc in your thyroid gland, you're in trouble. So that is the treatment. After all the sepia, the moscus, the ignatia, now she's getting copper chelate and zinc as her thyroid treatment. After 3 months on this treatment, the thyroid hormones reverted to normal range and all symptoms stopped, including the most obstinate symptom of difficulty swallowing. So it just took 3 months. Once I looked at the case with that perspective, 3 months of treatment, and I've been treating this patient for many years. Now that's a very simple thyroid case, okay? I'm just showing you what's possible if you can nail what the foundational cause is, or the obstacle to cure is. But now we're going to go on to look at more complex thyroid cases. And although it's complex, there's a generic picture that comes out, I've found, with most thyroid cases, most Hashimoto's cases, which I'll show you. Oh, I meant to put in her latest blood test there, which showed the thyroid hormones back to normal, but I haven't got it yet, so. Now with copper, my talk was going to be today, before I decided to talk about endocrine, was going to be transgenerational copper toxicity. So, just as an aside, this is a hair analysis of her son. Now, when you do a hair analysis, you want all your minerals to be along this line here. And as you can see, the copper is off the chart. It's way up here somewhere. 12 is double what you can see. Which shows you that if you want to think about how miasms can be inherited from the parent to the child, so can toxicity be inherited. So a parent with a burden of copper or mercury or some other toxicity can pass that to the child. In this case, a 12-year-old son who has been unwell for quite some time has an inherited burden of copper. Her other sons don't. It's just one son. So it's kind of a luck of the draw. So this is an idea of transgenerational toxic accumulation of copper.
John, is that throwing the lead? Does that have some relationship to the lead toxicity?
Yes. The father has high lead. The mother, who we've just been talking about, has high copper. So this poor little boy has inherited both burdens of toxicity, so he's been very sick for a long time.
So that also lends to the susceptibility with vaccines. You vaccinate a kid like this,
Yes.
you're going to wreak havoc.
Vaccines is one of those triggers which can pull something from latency into actuality. If you've got it waiting there, yeah.
John,
Yes.
how does the machine compare to doing a hair analysis?
Hair analysis requires good excretion for a good assay of your minerals, because hair is an excretory tissue. So most people with a chronic disease have that chronic disease because their pathways of excretion don't work properly. So in that case, the hair, in many cases, is going to underrepresent the toxic accumulation.
So, toxic accumulation, the toxic accumulation in the hair is there, the hair of the skin, in the sense of it's not as much as the skin.
So if your homeostasis is working reasonably well, even though maybe your excretion pathways are blocked, and we all know with treating people on the autistic spectrum that all the excretion pathways are blocked, right? But if your homeostasis is at least reasonably functional, the body's going to try and push the toxins to the periphery. You know, Herring's law. It'll try and keep the toxins on the outside of the body as much as it can and out of the organs. And that's where you'll pick up the toxins through this electroscan. 4 mils beneath the skin. So now,
John, I
Yeah.
just have a question. Did you
Yeah.
determine where the copper excess originated in the water?
I'm going to talk about where copper comes from a bit later. Yeah. So now I'm just going to summarise what I've found to be the main reasons why there's so much thyroid disease, and indeed all endocrine disease. What are we saying? India is the diabetes capital, followed by Egypt, and the other Western countries are the obesity capitals, aren't they? Everyone's getting obese. So we know that there's widespread endocrine problems everywhere in the world, particularly in the Western world, not just thyroid. We have to think of the endocrine system as being these 3 areas: the thyroid, the blood sugar, and the reproductive system. All this is interconnected when we talk about the endocrine system. So now I'm going to summarise what I believe are the main foundational causes and obstacles which exist in thyroid disease, and then we're going to go into looking at Hashimoto's thyroiditis. You're welcome to ask questions as I go along. I know this is quite complex for you. Yeah, just stop me if you need to.
Quick question,
So,
John. Did
yeah.
you bring your Holy Ghost hand with you?
Sure I did.
Yes!
Yeah. I know what people are going to do tonight. They'll be checking at my hotel door.
John, does it work with cats?
No.
I was only having a go. Sorry.
I've got one more question.
Yes.
In the case you presented, the zinc was at high levels, yet you supplemented zinc.
Yes.
Can you explain
Yes,
that?
okay. All right, so now I'm going to move you. Do you hear the question? Josh's question?
Because it
Okay.
wasn't accessible? Yeah. to the bottom.
Okay, so now, I've already given you the picture in your head of the building with foundations. Now we're going to go to the second picture. And I said all minerals have to exist in harmony with each other. Okay? So I want you to picture the ocean. Now, in a nice calm ocean where there's no storms and everything's going well, the minerals are going to be evenly dispersed through the ocean. But sometimes you have nasty critters that disturb things in the ocean. So I want you to imagine a huge octopus living at the bottom of the sea, with long, long, long arms stretching up to the top of the sea. And just below the top of the sea, that's the surface of the water, is the place where the oligoscan is taking its picture of the minerals. Now this octopus is a nasty creature, and he wants to play with the minerals. So he can reach up and hang on to the little fish swimming just below the surface of the water, and he can control what they do. But they are oblivious to the fact that he is there. So the fish are swimming along quite happily, just under the surface of the water, thinking that they're free to do what they want, but they're not. They're being controlled by the octopus. Now the octopus is a heavy metal, and mercury is the worst of the heavy metals that do this. And it wants to have soul rain down deep in the ocean. So all the minerals it holds up in suspension just under the surface of the water. And this is what's happened to this patient's zinc. All the zinc is not in the organs where it needs to be. It is up on the surface of the water, which is why it looks so high with the oligoscan. Because the copper in this case is one of the things which antagonize the zinc. It holds the zinc in suspension, right? So this patient who has high zinc actually has a zinc deficiency because it's being blocked from going into the organs. So how do you unblock that? You bring down the high copper and you give big doses of zinc, and that will break through the blockade, and then the zinc goes down into the sea. Yeah, got it? We'll see some more examples of this.
We also give homeopathic zinc.
I haven't given homeopathic zinc. I haven't tried that. I've just given mineral doses of zinc. But I give homeopathic copper.
Is it a different copper than what we use?
No.
Just copper?
It's a special formulation made as a potency cord, which I'll explain later.
Okay, and then you had a third thing on the treatment plan? The zinc supplementation, the cuprum,
That's all.
and there wasn't there a third thing on the treatment plan? Okay.
Just those two things in that case. So I just started with the most simple of the thyroid cases, just to get you into the flow of thinking the way I'm thinking. But we're going to look at some more complex cases now. But before we do that, I'm just going to summarise the things we're going to see in these cases, so you can get that into your heads. Yes, Derek?
So if you try the zinc, sorry, copper, when the zinc that's already there, when you distribute it, essentially, why do you need to supplement? The zinc's already high. If that got them away, wouldn't that then just...
Because you want to get the patient better as quickly as you can. So if you do both at once, then you get a much quicker result. And when you're treating toxicity, you have to also treat the deficiency at the same time. You can't just do one. This is the mistake I made early in my practice. I'd see high mercury or high this or high that. I just treat that. It didn't go as well. You have to replace the space that's taken up by the toxicity with the nutritional element that should be there.
So that high zinc is already on its way out, it can't be treated, in other words.
No, it will, but it's all condensed in one place. in the body. It looks like it's really high because it's being held in suspension, but actually it's a zinc deficiency because there's nothing in the organs where it needs to be. Yes, Naomi?
Oh, well, I just wondered if you could add a bit about why the zinc is high.
Because it's been obstructed by the copper.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. New concepts? Yep.
The thing is, how can we know that it's a deficiency when it's really going on the positive side? I mean, for us, when we see other stuff
Yeah.
that is
Good question.
going-
Yeah, good question. Okay. So, firstly, the patient has not been taking zinc. So it's impossible for someone to have that much zinc if they're not taking a big dose of the supplement for the last 12 months. Secondly, I've seen it so many times. So what's going to happen is I give the patient zinc. In the next scan, zinc is even higher, right? And I think, oh boy, you know. But I keep giving the patient zinc, and after some time, it changes direction. Even though she's still taking zinc, it starts going down.
To the normal.
So therefore we know we've broken the zinc blockade and it's now going down into the sea, down to the seabed.
How often do you retest in those situations?
It depends on how sick the patient is and whether there are new symptoms arising. So, in a chronically sick patient with changing symptoms, I would retest every 8 weeks. But for someone else who's getting better, it might be 3, 4, 5 months, sometimes even 12 months.
At the same time as you begin to see the zinc going back into a more normal range, what are you seeing the copper doing?
Going down.
Down also.
The copper may first go up because now we're mobilising, because now we're pulling the copper out of the organs and taking it to the periphery. So it may go up first before it goes down.
Yeah.
Excuse me, John, would it always be the copper that's causing?
No, no. We're going to look at this now.
Okay.
No, that's just one simple example, just to get you thinking in the way of mineral balances. But now we're going into more complex cases.
I just want to understand a bit more about copper because Tina Smith also talks about copper and he has got this copper carcinosin combination. So what's with copper?
I will tell you all about copper later in the presentation. That's coming.
I'm actually just thinking, because this is what I do, and I'm just thinking, you know, when you stand back, that maybe we were talking about low potency the other day, doing zinc low potency actually might balance out the zinc through the system without
Yes.
actually having to supplement it.
I haven't tried that, so you might be right.
Might be worth doing that.
I'll be interested to hear from you if that's effective.
John, one of the sources of zinc in many people's diet is black pepper. Yeah, I use that quite often as a zinc supplement.
What is black pepper?
Yeah.
Fabulous.
So it's good to ask that question too if you're using a lot of black pepper.
Okay, thank you. All right, shall we go on? Now we're going a bit deeper into the ocean, all right? So now, this is what you're going to see in thyroid disease. Now, I've seen 15 patients with Hashimoto's in the last 18 months. It's the same for each of them. Okay, so I'm really talking about things that are showing a pattern. So firstly, with deficiency, there are 4 key things. And not every Hashimoto's patient has every 4, but they'll have at least one of these. Low zinc, low chromium, low iodine, low selenium. All these things are vitally important for thyroid function. This is the food of the thyroid gland. And we also have toxicity. Okay? The toxicities are copper, I've just talked about copper, antimony, mercury, and the halogens, fluoride, bromide, chlorine. Now, these things all have an adverse effect upon the thyroid gland. Now, the more of these things that you have, so let's say you have all 4 of those deficiencies, and let's say you have all of those toxicities, you're in a pretty bad way, the more sick you are. Okay? So the first case we saw just had the copper and zinc problem. That was a simple case. So now we're going to go into far more complex cases. And it's usually the Hashimoto's people, not always, it's usually the Hashimoto's people who have these more complex pictures. Okay?
So can
you just say, deficiencies, there was zinc.
Back one slide.
We're going to email everybody the PowerPoints.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this PowerPoint will come to you, so don't you have to write it all down. Okay, now, this is not case 2, it's case 3. She has EMS with heavy bleeding, anxiety, weight gain, rosacea, hair loss, post-childbirth, fatigue, unrefreshing sleep, a common set of symptoms you're going to see with women who come into your practice. She's had her hormonal symptoms ever since she went through puberty, so it's a long-standing disease. She's now 37. She's had 2 children, 2 miscarriages, and she has heat intolerance. Now, her thyroid hormones are within normal range. Do you think that's going to influence my decisions about this case, now that you know what I'm saying? No, forget it. I don't care what the thyroid hormones are doing. Clinically speaking, she's got an endocrine problem. She's very obese, terrible PMS, heat intolerance, that's enough for me. So clinically speaking, we've got an endocrine case. Okay, now let's look at her foundations. We have the same situation here with the copper excess and the zinc blockade, exactly the same. We have critically low chromium. It's critical because it's off the chart. She's got 40 and the reference range is 82, so she's way, way below the reference range. And we have pretty critical iodine as well. So when you see these reds, that means it's critical. Do something now. The patient's in a bad way. And now we're looking at the toxic elements. This is the same on the scan. Now this graph is different to the first graph. It's a simple left to right graph, right? So we expect everybody to have some toxicity here in the normal zone. Everybody. You can't live in the modern world and escape toxicity, I'm afraid. If you want to do that, you're on the wrong planet. Once you have an element that goes beyond this dark line, now it becomes clinically relevant to the patient's disease. So this patient has 3 of the things I was talking about that are evident. We have high antimony here, and we have high mercury here. So this is a classic picture of a patient who's going into Hashimoto's thyroiditis. All right? Everything is going wrong except for her selenium. So what's the treatment for this patient? So before I started talking to you about foundations and minerals, okay, you might have started to think, okay, this patient needs sepia. And that's indeed what I've given her. Sepia 200, EOD means every other day. So every second day she's having some sepia. But on the alternate day, I'm giving her my copper chelate again. Why am I starting with copper? Because copper is a nutritional element. It's easier to move out than heavy metals. They take longer. So I'm just starting with the copper. I'm giving her some celandine in tincture for liver support, because when you're moving out high copper, it goes down through the liver. If you don't support the liver, then you get blockage and you get digestive symptoms coming up. I'm giving her some zinc, some iodine, some chromium. CH77 is an alkalizing solution that you can put in your water, because the more alkaline you are, the easier it is for your body to start to move heavy metals. And I talked to her about PET, BPA, phthalates, because unfortunately, all our Hashimoto's people think they're doing the right thing by drinking their lovely mineral water in these PET plastic bottles, but the PET plastic bottles contain antimony. The antimony, soft food-grade plastic, not just PET plastic bottles, the soft plastic wrap that you buy your cheese in, the soft plastic yogurt container, the soft plastic around your leg of lamb that you're going to have for dinner, All this contains antimony. Antimony is a severe endocrine disruptor. All these people, actually all of us, none of us should be using plastic really, but if you've got an endocrine problem, you've got to get rid of all the plastic in your life. The food grade plastic. What happens? Okay, first follow-up is in 6 weeks. She got nausea for the first 10 days of treatment. Why is that, do you think? Copper is going down through the liver and making her nauseous. I shouldn't say the word nausea today, should I, Scylla? She has, her fatigue starts to improve after 10 days. Her menstruation now goes for 5 days instead of 8 days, and there's a lot less pain. Her back pain is better, her anxiety is better, her hair loss is better. So you see how looking at the patient in this way, at the foundational causes of the disease, you see a quick result. You see things moving quickly. If they don't move quickly, you know you're not on the right track. I'm still giving the sepia because, homeopathically speaking, that's her remedy. But she needs more than the sepia, as we saw with the first cases. So the correct treatment path is evident with improvement in general symptoms after initial mild aggravation. Yeah, all sounds good. After 3 months, she starts losing weight. So she struggled with her weight for 20 years. And you can see how the endocrine system is now starting to regulate the system better. The thyroid's working better. All this in a patient who's told by her doctor she hasn't got a thyroid problem. So now we're going to have a look into Hashimoto's. How are we going with our time?
It's 10 o'clock.
When is break time?
11.
Oh, okay, so we've got plenty of time. Does anybody have any questions before we start looking in depth at Hashimoto's?
Where can I get myself scanned?
I was just thinking, if there was any possibility that you could do some scans of people on the spot and put them up on the screen.
Of course I can, yeah. Am I able to connect my laptop computer to the PowerPoint?
To the
PowerPoint slides?
Yeah.
Not now, later.
Yeah.
Do you want to do that in this session or?
I think that'll be possible. We can do it in this session if you like. I've got 2 hours, haven't I?
We've got 1 more hour.
1 more hour, okay. Well, let's see how we go. If we don't have time in this session, there'll be time while we're together sometime, okay?
There'll be time on Friday afternoon.
Are there any questions now before we delve into Hashimoto's thyroiditis?
You treat also the same way the hyperthyroidism.
Well, Hashimoto's often goes between them both. It can be low this week and then it goes into high next week. So it's all over the place, which is why it's difficult to treat Hashimoto's medically speaking, but the same principles apply. I haven't actually treated another case of Graves' disease since that case. As I say, we don't really see that many in Australia because they're all on that drug, neomeprazole. But certainly, as I say, in the last 18 months, I've seen 15 Hashimoto's patients, so we do see a lot of those. Yeah.
John, I've just got one question. You're saying this also feeds into the reproductive system, and that's a big issue for a lot of women, things like endometriosis and those sorts of overgrowths. Do you see that as a part of these mineral deficiencies, toxicities, etc.?
If a woman just had a reproductive issue alone, without any of the more general endocrine system symptoms,
Yeah.
maybe not. Maybe it's something local to that body system.
Sure.
But what we can say is we are seeing widespread endocrine disturbance
Yeah.
in the modern age. It's going to become so critical that we know how to treat it because of all the different presentations, not just the reproductive parts, but the obesity, the diabetes, the thyroid, all this endocrine problem.
And that's right. And often in these cases that I found, there'll be those basic symptoms of unrefreshing sleep, either cold or thirst or digestive disorders that are all part of the picture. You know? And so, and they become very complex, and you just can't sort of treat this or that. You know, I'm sort of thinking this is.
Well, in all those cases now, I would use the Oligo scan,
Yeah.
so I can see what the foundations are like.
Okay.
Now, that isn't to say that all your answers are always going to be on the Oligo scan.
No.
Because in the Oligo scan, we're looking at toxicity and deficiency. We're not looking at infection. And infection, as we know, plays a big part in chronic disease as well. But at least it's going to show us a prism into a large part of the structural integrity of the patient, which can tell us a lot, as you can see from these cases.
Sure.
Excuse me 1 second, John. We're just going to get the mic. Can you tell people to wait for the microphone before they ask the question, and I'll pass it to them.
Okay, we want to try and record all the questions on the film, so Naeem is going to pass the microphone to you if you have a question.
I can't remember whether the Oligo scan showed iodine deficiency.
Yes, it does.
Okay. What about the other halogens?
No. It doesn't show you fluoride, chloride, or bromide. It doesn't show you those halogens. But you can assume, and I'm going to come and talk about iodine, you can assume if the iodine is in the red, then the patient is very likely, in the West, in Australia or New Zealand at least, or America, is very likely has toxic amounts of fluoride and chloride, toxic amounts,
So I did some blood tests of people with fluoride to test their fluoride levels, and we were able to establish some fluoride toxicity through doing a simple fluoride blood test, which is another way to do it.
Yeah, I'll come to talk about iodine because it's such a huge part of this presentation. But just as we found that the zinc was being blocked by the copper, the iodine was being blocked by the fluoride and the chlorine. Yeah.
One more question, sorry.
I wanted to just ask you what happens when you give a high dose of a mineral like zinc to a patient when everything is out of balance. What can that potentially do?
Because zinc is one of the things that's going to clean up the toxicity, the copper, the antimony, the mercury, if you give too much too soon, the patient will get nauseous. Or in a mercury patient, they'll get aggravation of all their symptoms. So you start with smaller doses and you go up. And I'm going to tell you later how far you can go up. And you make sure you take your zinc with your food. If you don't take it with your food, you'll get nausea. You've got a lot of toxicity. I pressed too hard again, sorry. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So here we have a patient with Hashimoto's. She's been diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. She's had her Hashimoto's, I think, for 30 years. This is now we're in a chronic case. So she has headaches, insomnia, weight gain, poor immunity. She's getting every cold and flu that goes around. This is a common thing with Hashimoto's. Slide. Back one. Back one. No, backwards. The other way. Back. 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 Yeah. Okay. It's almost like we're looking at the same patient. The same problem with the copper and zinc, the same problem with the chromium, the same problem with the iodine. But in this case, we also have a problem with the selenium. It's the same pattern.
Why don't you see that there's a problem with magnesium and there's something else?
Well, there is, but we're just going to focus on the essential foundations for Hashimoto's today, but yes, there is a problem there as well. So we have the same problems: zinc, chromium, iodine, magnesium, and selenium. In terms of the toxicity, same again. We have the high antimony, we have the high mercury.
If you have a question, put up your hand so I can pass the microphone to you. Yes.
So we have antimony, we have copper, we have mercury. And we have this blockade against the iodine by the three halogens, the fluoride, chlorine, bromide. So these very chronic cases have a combination of all these things, and the more sick the patient is, the more likely they are to have all these things happening. I found out from talking to someone yesterday, I think you were telling me there's no fluoride in the water here in Bali, but in the West, in Australia, in New Zealand, I presume, in the States, the biggest folly of the modern age is putting fluoride in the water systems. The first thing it does, it'll pull the copper out of the copper pipes. So someone was asking about where copper comes from. Here's one reason. The fluoride pulls copper out of the copper pipes which carry the water to your house. The second thing is the fluoride sets up a blockade against your iodine. So even though maybe you're taking iodine salt every day, your iodine can't enter the cells if your fluoride is high. So you see, all the Hashimoto's patients are going to die with beautiful teeth. Beautiful teeth.
You know that that's not right.
Yeah, I know. It's a folly. It's a folly.
Yeah, I know. But when they when they looked at the teeth of the workers who worked on the uranium plants in the States, where they used fluoride to enrich uranium, they said they didn't have any teeth problems. This is what it said in the reports, but they didn't have any teeth problems because they didn't actually have teeth.
Look, putting fluoride in the water supply has nothing to do with good dentistry. It has more to do with, industry and lobbying. Okay, implications of low zinc. Let's just go through each of the foundations one by one. So nervous system depletion, poor concentration, foggy head, tics and twitches, poor immunity, and poor digestion because you need your zinc to properly produce your digestive enzymes. It allows the accumulation of toxic elements. So think about zinc as the bouncer that stands at the door to the club and stops the shady characters from entering. In this case, we're talking about copper, antimony and mercury, which are the huge endocrine disruptors. The Australian soil certainly is deficient in zinc, we know that. And it's even more deficient once it's blockaded by these elements. Antimony, mercury, cadmium, aluminium, copper, all set up a blockade against your zinc. So that's why if you start using a liver scan, you're going to see that high zinc in so many patients with these elements. How do we break through a zinc blockade? We give zinc every day. I haven't tried, I mean, a dose, Melanie, you can try that. Up to 100 milligrams of elemental zinc per day. Now, that seems like a very big dose, but that's what I've used in patients with a huge zinc blockade. And I keep doing that until the blockade is broken. And you know it's broken once that high zinc changes direction and starts going down. If there was no such thing as a blockade, how can it be that if you're taking 100 milligrams of elemental zinc, how can it suddenly start to go down? It can't. So it proves there's a blockade.
Microphone.
seems like it's essential to retest consistently. So for us to treat patients, we really need to obtain one of these scans.
You can obtain one of these scans.
And you're going to tell us how
I'll tell you how to get them.
do that. Okay.
You know, Silla, in time, once you start working in this way, you'll know when it's time to change doses. You'll see the signs, right? It's just all new to you today, saying, "Oh, I need the scan." Yeah, but once you start working in this way, it becomes clear to you when to change doses and things.
John, what would John?
Loud voice.
Okay. John, what would be the improvements that you would be seeing in the patient? If you're looking at the charts and you're seeing everything kind of regulate, what would you also see within the
Can you
patient?
Repeat the questions over.
What improvements will I see as the tests are changing positively? That's a good question. So that's what you want to see. You don't want to be seeing the test mineral, the minerals improving and the toxicity coming down and the patient saying, "I'm feeling worse." That's not what you want to see. If that's happening, there's something else that you haven't seen yet that's not on your oligoscan screen. So usually you're going to see, as the picture improves with oligoscan, that is consistent with patient improvement, as you've seen so far. That's what you want to see. So it should be a red bullet to you. If the oligoscan results are improving but the patient says, "I'm worse," you know there's something else that's not on the oligoscan screen. So that might be an infection, or it might be something else that's toxic that is not an element. If that patient happens to be up in the rice fields we were yesterday, spraying that Roundup every day without protection, that might be what it is making them sick. That won't show on the oligoscan screen.
So therefore, if that was the case, and we just look at other obstacles to cure, basically.
Obstacles to cure, ask more questions about their history, where they live, what they do. Look for signs of infection, swollen lymph glands, changes in temperature, up and down, at night time. Look for questions, more clues about what it is that's underpinning their disease. Right? Not all disease is in the foundations. But in endocrine diseases, most of it is. That isn't to say that there's no infective process with Hashimoto's. I have seen cases that have had viral triggers as well. But most of the cases have this pattern I'm talking about today. So how do we break zinc blockade? We give zinc supplement and we pull out the antagonistic heavy metals, whether it's copper, whether it's mercury, whether it's antimony. I'll be talking more about how we do that later in the presentation. So the elements that block your zinc, here they are: aluminium, antimony, cadmium, copper, and mercury. Now, each of these has a clinical picture. Some of those are described in my book at the back of the room there, Obstacles to Cure. I talk about cadmium, copper, mercury, and lead, and the clinical pictures you'll see with chronic accumulation of those elements. I don't yet talk about antimony in that book because I wrote it before doing this work. But the next edition I write will. So today I'm telling you about antimony. So the zinc blockade is common to Hashimoto's patients and is blockaded by both the toxic elements and the high level of copper that you're going to see. Low chromium, what does that mean for the patient? You're going to have unstable blood sugar. This may explain why the patient wakes up feeling so tired in the morning despite having a good sleep, because for someone with low chromium and unstable blood sugar, it's a long time between dinner and breakfast. So these patients need to take a chromium supplement. They need to have a bedtime protein snack. If they get up for a pee in the night, they should have another snack. And this will greatly improve their tiredness in the morning. So some of the symptoms of low chromium are going to be anxiety, dizziness, dry mouth, palpitations. A lot of patients I've seen over the years who come in with the diagnosis of anxiety, it's just low blood sugar. Once you correct the blood sugar, the anxiety goes away. This is for anxiety unexplained by the life situation, Low chromium alerts you to a pre-diabetic state. Yeah, so that red critical chromium we see has to be corrected. If there's a family history of diabetes and you don't correct the chromium, they're going to go into diabetes. And you'll see that long before you see changes in the blood sugar, right? Chromium is the first thing you're going to see, long before the blood sugar starts to play up. Why? Why chromium deficient? So the excess consumptions of sugars and carbohydrates, which is rife in the Western world, the denaturing of our food with chemicals, maybe, genetic predisposition. Probably the biggest thing is the xenoestrogens, right? So again, we've talked about the plastics, the chemicals, the pesticides, your personal care products, if they contain the phthalates or the BPA in them. All these things are xenoestrogens which affect your chromium. And even taking the pill, the OCP, can affect your chromium in some people. It blocks the chromium accumulation. And chromium is, like the zinc, blockaded by toxic elements. In this case, especially the antimony. Antimony blocks chromium. And possibly the halogens we've talked about, the same halogens that block your iodine.
Just before you go off there,
I've observed some other patients that have been put onto chromium supplements and had massive diarrhea, which has then caused them to stop it. Is that just a detox reaction, or how would you read that?
It must be a detox reaction. So that massive dose of chromium is pulling something that's toxic too quickly.
Right.
So it's opened a channel of excretion too quickly for them.
Thank you.
Iodine. Implications of low iodine. Shall I keep going, or you want a little break? Right? Keep going. So low iodine allows heavy metal accumulation, especially mercury and antimony. Right? Remember I said at the start, if you've got deficiency and toxicity, they always come together. You don't just have one, they come together. So if your iodine is low, you're going to start accumulating mercury and antimony, or the other way around. If you've got lots of mercury, like me, if you've had silver tooth amalgams for most of your life, that's going to block your iodine. It inhibits correct thyroid activity. You get hypothyroid symptoms, even though the thyroid hormones may be in range. You're more likely to get tumour formation, fibrocystic breast disease, that's what you're more likely to experience, ovarian cysts, and your immunity is compromised if your iodine is low. Okay, now, you might say to your patient, go and get your iodine checked. So they'll go to the doctor and request the iodine spot test. It will come back saying, yeah, iodine's fine, no issue. Wrong. The iodine spot tests are grossly inaccurate. Grossly inaccurate.
Can I just
Just add to that even though the spot iodine tests underrepresent the true iodine status, in Australia, this iodine expert called Chris Eastman, who worked in Nepal with cretinism, he spot tested Australian school children in about 3 or 4 different states and found that 50% of them had low iodine.
So the longer you've been in existence in this world, if you live in the Western world, the more you're going to accumulate fluoride and chlorine in your body. So the greater your blockade against your iodine, the older you are. So when you're young, you don't have all those amounts. maybe your fluoride and chlorine yet. So the iodine spot test might represent a true picture. Yeah.
Can I just ask what your thoughts are about the...
On the bottom.
Yes, it is.
Big voice.
What's your thoughts about doing the saliva and urine test again?
What I can say is I've used the loading iodine test, and I'll show you one now. Okay, so here's a Hashimoto's patient. Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Went to the doctor. No, iodine's fine. 739 is way over the reference range. You're not deficient in iodine. You don't need to take iodine. In fact, don't take the iodine that John Gamble told you to take because it'll be toxic. It'll send you into thyroid toxicosis, so don't take it, right? So this is what you can expect your patients to experience if they go to the doctor. So I did a loading iodine test. A loading iodine test means the patient takes 50 milligrams of iodine and then they capture all their urine for the following 24 hours to see how much iodine is excreted in the urine. This is a far more accurate way of testing iodine than doing the spot iodine test. Here is the loading iodine test done by Doctors Data in the States, a very reputable laboratory, 80% excretion. Now, if this patient had too much iodine, she'd have 100% excretion, right? So the body is keeping back at least 20% of the iodine. So we know she needs iodine. Now, this test agrees with the oligoscan. You see, this is the same patient, at the same time, we did a oligoscan. A oligoscan also tells us iodine is critically low. The spot urine test tells us iodine is too high. She doesn't need iodine. A more precise test, the loading iodine test, and the oligoscan agree with each other. So who are we going to believe? I know who I believe. This one. So this patient has the same pattern. Not so much high copper, although it's almost high, but we have the same zinc blockade, the same, oh that's low manganese in this case, not chromium, look. Oh, it's chromium, yeah. Just a moment. And low iodine. Same pattern again. A different Hashimoto's patient with the same foundational pattern of illness. And look at the antimony. Same patient, high antimony, high mercury, plus she has high cadmium. So this is fatigue. When you get high cadmium like this, you always get unrefreshing sleep. Even if you've slept well, you wake up feeling exhausted. This is high cadmium. I explained. Sorry?
Just like my dog with the polyp.
Like your dog. Okay, so now I want you to step out of iodine phobia. Well, I was schooled with iodine phobia. Never in my wildest dreams would I imagine giving milligram doses of iodine to a patient. Only microgram doses. Right? So how much iodine are we going to give? Let's have a look. I think I'm going to tell you a bit later, but just get out of that mindset of saying iodine's toxic, we can't give it in big doses. It's not true. So, the iodine blockade, we have fluoride, we have chlorine, we have the bromides. All three gang up on our poor iodine. Right? Poor little iodine, that's right. Plus, if you buy your mineral water like this, which comes in your PET bottle, you've got antimony. So you've got those three halogens, and you've got the element antimony, all ganging up on your poor little iodine. Half an hour till we finish. It's a break. Consequence, our water supply is killing us. Yeah? We think we're drinking healthy water, but it's killing us. Right. How do we break through the iodine blockade? We use Celtic sea salt, right? 2 teaspoons a day in a glass of non-PET, non-fluoridated, non-chlorinated water for 7 days. This binds to the other halogens, the fluorides, the chlorines, the bromides, and makes you excrete them and creates some space for your iodine. And now I'm starting patients on 12.5 milligrams, not micrograms, of iodine each day. No aggravation, no thyrotoxicosis, right? Now, there's a book you can buy from an American doctor called Dr. Brownstein, who's written a book called Iodine, is it? What's the name of the book, Naima?
I can't remember.
Okay.
I can't
David
remember.
Brownstein.
But if you Google Dr.
It's iodine, why we need it, and why we can't live without it.
Okay.
Iodine, why we need it and why we can't live without it. But if you just Google, forget his first name, Dr. Brownstein.
David Brownstein.
David Brownstein.
All right.
You'll come up with his website and he's written
All right.
books.
So now, if you read that book, you'll lose all your fear about giving high doses of iodine. Now, what I know he does, his record is giving 400 milligrams of iodine every day to a Hashimoto's patient. This is off the record, right? 400 milligrams. And if that patient has 400 milligrams of iodine every day, symptom-free of Hashimoto's. Now that's one way of looking at treating Hashimoto's. We're looking at other things as well, a bit more holistic. It's not just the iodine problem. It's the things that block the iodine and the other foundations in the house that are lacking that we're treating today as well.
So why, if you give zinc daily doses that are high, and why, if you give zinc in high doses, it gives you nausea and it doesn't solve the problem? And why, if you give iodine,
If you have high copper and you give high doses of zinc, 95% of copper excretion takes place through the liver. The copper will congeal in the biliary system and partially block the system, and that will give you nausea. So it's the copper, essentially, which gives you the nausea. The iodine doesn't pull out copper. The iodine pulls out antimony, mercury, and the other halogens. It doesn't touch copper.
John, do you have experience with Lugol's iodine solution?
We're currently trying Lugol's iodine solution because it's much cheaper than other forms of iodine that we've been trying. I don't think it's quite as good. I think it's very, very economical, but it's not the best form of iodine to take, I don't think.
John, on that note about... As we were talking about zinc supplementation causing nausea, have you considered maybe giving the patient a way to detox the elementary organs before supplementing them?
Yes, so we use celandine, chelidonium tincture. At the same time, if we think there's going to be problems with nausea or liver congestion, we'll always give that first. Yeah.
Okay, because what I have seen at the detox center I work at, we do a natural detox with them, so just juice supplements and coffee enemas. Because coffee essentially stimulates the liver to produce more bile and so emulsify fat and get rid of a lot of colonic toxins. And then we find that whatever prescription medication they are on, whether it's diabetes or thyroid medication, they always need much less or they don't need it at all.
Juices are root vegetable juices, you mean?
Both,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. So root vegetable juices and coffee enemas, fabulous. Probably wouldn't be able to convince all my patients to use coffee enemas.
Yeah, they have
but
to get over the mental process.
But look, any method that opens the channels of excretion, you want all your channels of excretion to open. And the more toxicity you have, the more you need all the channels to be open. So when you've got antimony and mercury particularly, you need all the channels open. So you need the liver working properly, you need the kidneys working properly, and you need the skin working properly. So if the patient is not sweating, they need to go and have a sauna and open that channel of excretion. particularly the mercury patients?
When I was investigating these things for my own health, I did a series of detox of my hands using clay, and I think that that was really helpful for opening channels of detoxification. And it's still now the place where I block up the most, well, one of the places. And I know that because my hands and my feet get extremely hot. And so I use leadum in that situation and just do more clay detoxes.
Is that the bentonite clay?
Yeah. That's through Biotrace in New Zealand.
Biotrace New Zealand now use Oligoscan.
Ah, do they? Shown that they'd done that a year ago, or 2 years ago.
We just don't bentonite clay to a juice. Wait.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned bentonite clay, because what we also do is put a teaspoon of bentonite clay into a juice or a smoothie, a vegetable or a fruit smoothie, and as you know, it absorbs up to 40 times its own weight of heavy metals. So,
So bentonite clay as well. So I'm mostly talking about homeopathy today, about how to move heavy metals, but all these things that we're talking about are going to help as well, of course.
The bentonite also has a huge application with cease, and I'll talk more about that on Friday.
Thank you. Implications of low magnesium. We have acidity, inability for the nervous system to relax, broken sleep, spasms, cramps, difficulty focusing the mind, restlessness, agitation, anxiety. And it works with vitamin D and calcium to support the parathyroids. Low selenium, so protection against oxidative stress, especially from heavy metals, so it's very important. And of course it's vital for correct T4 to T3 conversion in the thyroid. Why? Low selenium. Deficiency in foods, I guess, due to the degradation of the soil quality from modern agricultural practices. And copper, mercury, selenium are the guys that gang up on your, copper, mercury and antimony are the guys that will gang up on your selenium and block it. So you can see how destructive the heavy metals are, not just because they're essentially toxic, but because of the blocking effect they have on your nutritional elements. That's why they're so toxic. They stop your nutritional elements doing their job. They remove the foundations of your house. All right, back to the previous case. This is the severe Hashimoto's case with 30 years Hashimoto's with chronic fatigue syndrome we just talked about before. So, after 6 months, what's improving? Everything is improving. This is after 30 years of being unwell. So no headaches, fabulous, fatigue is better, insomnia is better, and the immune system is much better. She's not catching colds and flus all the time.
Excuse me, John, is that the case that you first treated for chronic fatigue?
The one I showed a bit earlier.
Yeah. So there was one case that you
we bypassed to talk about iodine, and I showed the iodine results. But previous to that is this chronic fatigue case with Hashimoto's, a 30 years duration. That's this case.
Is that the lady that you saw 30 years ago and couldn't help? Oh, okay, right.
All right, so what you can also do with your Oligoscan is do a comparative chart. So the grey bands are the previous test, and the coloured bands are the current test. So you can do a comparison. So you can see giving this patient copper chelated zinc, copper is going up, right? So we're pulling zinc out of the organs to the periphery. Zinc is still going up. We've not broken the zinc blockade yet. Once we break the zinc blockade, zinc will start going down. Chromium is only very slightly improving. It's gone from 43 to 45. This is after 6 months. So you can see, even on a big dose of chromium, it's very slow. What else was there? That's all there was. So, my conclusions. The nutrient minerals are being used up very quickly, even though she's taking big doses of them. How are they being used up? They are assisting the body to remove the toxic elements. In other words, the good guys come into the body, pick up the bad guys by the scruff of the neck and march out with them. So a lot of that nutritional elements that we're taking in a chronic case like this just come in and go out again, because they're taking the bad guys out with them. They're chelating the bad guys. So you don't start to get much accumulation of your nutrient elements until the bad guys come right down. But also they're still being blockaded because there's so many bad guys there. The zinc tries to come in, or the chromium tries to come in, and the bad guys just send it away. So that's another thing. You need enough for it to push against the bad guys. And maybe also the endocrine system is so depleted of its nutrients, it's just soaking them up. You know what I mean? Soaking them up. So how much chromium should such a case be given? And iodine. So in this case now she's on 15 milligrams, but you know, I'm still noticing my own caution with iodine, even though I've just told you to. Don't be frightened about giving big doses of iodine. There's a clinic in Australia called the Lucy Rose Clinic, which specialises in the treatment of thyroid diseases. Now what they do is they start at 12.5 milligrams of iodine and they increase up to 50 milligrams of iodine per day. Not micrograms, milligrams. So that's what I guess what I'll start doing, in addition to what I'm already talking about with the other minerals.
Do you give it a liquid suspension or do you...
Liquid suspension. We have been using a product called Amidine, which is a very good source of liquid iodine, but it's quite expensive, so we're just trying Dugol's iodine because it's so cheap, but I don't think it's absorbed as well as the other one.
Excuse me, John. According to one source, I've been told that the Japanese population have 13 milligrams in their diet every day of iodine through the seaweed.
Yes, I've read something similar. Thank you, Pauline.
And what about using fucus?
Have you used fucus, the seaweed tincture, as a source of iodine for your patients?
No, I haven't. I don't know how much of that you need to take to get 15 milligrams of iodine. Quite a lot, probably. And I'm giving 800 micrograms of chromium picolinate per day. That's a big dose of chromium. That's like 4 tablets a day of chromium. So, if we don't give these big doses of iodine and chromium, that's an obstacle to cure. Yep. So the same patient, are the toxic elements going to come down? Again, we have a comparison. So the antimony is coming down. You can see the previous test 6 months earlier is the grey bar. Antimony is coming down. Is the mercury coming down? Yes. So this is 6 months. So this is a chronic case, right? She's been on well for 30 years, so things are going to change slowly. But we know that all her symptoms are getting better. Does that agree with what we've seen in the oligo scans? The answer is yes. The toxic elements are coming down. They're going in the right direction.
John, do you use homeopathic potencies during kind of treatment, or do you always kind of give it?
I'm just firstly going through mineral doses of the elements, and then we're going to take you into using homeopathy.
Thank you.
And right, to the break.
Not yet.
Am I talking after the break as well? I'm not. Oh, okay. All right, so this is the conclusion. The 2 toxic factors in Hashimoto's particularly are the antimony and the mercury. Okay, just summarising now. Most Hashimoto's patients, I think there's been one that hasn't had this, but everybody else has, the mercury and the antimony. Antimony is the supreme endocrine disruptor. It antagonises the chromium and the zinc. So as I said, it's in the plastic bottles. It's also in flame retardants, so those chemicals they put on your clothing or on your couch to inhibit fire. Those flame retardant chemicals they use are full of antimony.
And carpets.
And mattresses, yep, all that. So we can also say, as well as our water, our modern food practices are also killing us too. Mercury antagonises your zinc, your iodine, your selenium. It's also an endocrine disruptor. You're going to get patients with lots of brain fog, gut dysbiosis, and the mercury patients are the most sensitive patients. So those patients who aggravate from everything you give them are most likely mercury patients. Where does mercury come from? We know it's in the dental amalgams. I had mine taken out when I was 45, I think. It's in seafood, of course, and it's also still in vaccines, I believe, isn't it? Still in vaccines? The flu shots have it.
Some of the flu shots.
Some of the flu shots. And the places where they have coal burning, the air's full of mercury vapor. Yes?
Just on the second point, in patients over 40, I had a patient who came in with mercury toxicity, and he had amalgams fitted 3 years ago in Australia. So I went to the cheap mate dentist, and they gave me mercury. They still use it.
It's amazing, isn't it? They're still using mercury even in this age. So, you know, I can say most of your chronic fatigue patients, whether male or female, in my age group, are going to have mercury, right? Because they had their fillings put in when they were kids, and they've had that mercury in their bodies all their lives. So I know that's a pretty wide-reaching statement, but you can think that way with all your chronic fatigue patients in their 50s and beyond.
There's still trace amounts in many vaccines, not just flu vaccines. Hep B, tetanus.
Just as a matter of interest, does everyone know that these light bulbs above us are absolutely filled with mercury? And we cannot buy the normal globes anymore. So if you break one of these, if one of these energy conserving bulbs, you need to Google how to get rid of them, because there's a 2-page instruction of how and what to do with these globes.
Copper, okay, so we know copper blocks your iron, so even though you might have a blood test showing your hemoglobin is normal, if you've got high copper blocks the entry of the iron into the cell on a cellular level. So it gives you a kind of deficiency of iron. It also blocks your zinc, as we know. Yeah. The copper symptoms are numerous. There's a whole chapter on copper in my book out the back there. So you've got neurological symptoms from high copper: tics, restless limbs, restless sleep, headaches, epilepsy. I've cured a case of child epilepsy just by bringing down the copper. You've got cognitive and emotional symptoms: anxiety, depression, poor concentration. Most children with ADHD have high copper. You've got susceptibility to infections, viral and yeast infections, particularly if the copper is high. What's called allergies, so more sensitive to foods, more sensitive to environmentals, and certainly more sensitive to the high copper foods. You've got IBS, particularly in young women who are taking the pill, because copper loves estrogens, particularly synthetic estrogens. So if you're taking the pill and you're susceptible to it, the copper combines with the estrogen and accumulates in your liver, and you get IBS. Constipation dominant, IBS. There's lots of gas and nausea.
15 minutes.
You're more likely going to have hormonal symptoms with high copper, terrible PMS, headaches at period time, and of course it's an endocrine disruptor. So fundamental causes, deficiency, toxicity. Remember, you always have them both. They don't come one singly. All right, so the common pattern is there again for you with deficiency, all the things we've talked about. Okay, we've talked about removing the obstacles by mineralizing the patient. There's the doses there that I recommend on that slide. Now, treatment of toxicity. So, I'm still a homeopath, even though I'm delving into minerals. I still like to use my homeopathy. So, I developed 6 homeopathic chelates for each of these 6 toxins. Now, each of these contains a potency chord of the element. So, for a couple we've been talking about, for example, it contains cuprum metallicum, 6C, 12C, 30C, 200C, and they're manufactured all together in the one bottle. So for homeopaths who want stock bottles of these chelates, they're manufactured by the sponsor of the Bali project, Martin & Pleasance, a Melbourne company in Australia. You can buy them from them. You just have to say, I want aluminium chelate, or I want copper chelate, and they'll say, oh, you've been reading John Gamble's book, haven't you? But for people who don't want to dispense remedies, they're also made by a Queensland company called Bio Research brand, and that's for naturopaths or other healthcare providers who don't want to dispense remedies but want them already pre-packaged. So they also come pre-packaged in Bio Research brand formulas. So how do we give them? Oh yes, there they are. So with the Bio Research brand, they're called something else. We can't make therapeutic claims. So they're just called AL Met, or copper is called CU Met. But they're exactly the same thing, just you don't need to dispense them.
Where's Bio Research located?
Bio Research is a Queensland company. I don't know if they sell their products in the US. Anyway, it doesn't matter because you're a homeopath and you can just dispense them anyway. Just buy the stock bottles from Martin & Pleasance.
Oh.
It's easier. This is for people who don't like to dispense stuff. Yeah. So for naturopaths or for chiropractors or people who want to use them but don't like to dispense remedies. So if you want stock remedies, you go to Martin & Pleasance in Australia for them. So the dose is 5 drops once every second day. You saw in the previous cases I gave sepia on one day, and on the alternate day I gave my copper chelate to bring down the high copper. So 1 day on, 1 day off. I make an exception to that in very sensitive patients like our mercury patients. I could spend a whole day talking about mercury to you, but we haven't got time today. But because mercury patients are the most sensitive, and if they've got terrible brain fog, once you start moving the mercury, you want it to keep moving. So you don't want every second day to take the mercury chelate. You want something to be always moving the mercury around. So for those patients, I tell them to put 10 drops into, I said that? No, I haven't. No, I haven't said that. Okay. I say put 10 drops of your mercury chelate into your drink bottle and just sip your water over 24 hours as you would normally do with your water. So every time they get a sip of water, that mercury is being moved around. It can't settle in any one place. Because once you've got a patient with brain fog and you start to move the mercury out of the brain, if you let it settle for too long, it goes back and the brain fog gets worse. So for mercury patients, I often say, not every second day, every day, in fact, every hour or two through the day, and even through the night. Leave some and have some through the night as well.
So the second metal you were chelating every other day was antimony and mercury?
Okay, let's say you've got this chronic Hashimoto's case and she has high mercury, high antimony. No other clinical symptoms to prescribe on, really. You can give two at once. So on one day you'll give the antimony, the other day you'll give the mercury. Ten minutes.
I mean, children don't need those drops.
No? Oh, well, no. Same dose. Same dose. Yeah, just 5 drops. If the patient is super sensitive, then I would say...
I've had to know the drops.
Yeah, okay. Or for someone who's sensitive, you might just say take 1 drop, or you might say plus it in water. So you have to gauge the sensitivity of your patient as you would for any kind of patient.
In a case where you have multiple toxicities, for example, mercury, antimony, something else, is there a hierarchy, is there an order to which needs to be detoxed first?
You let the symptoms of the patient dictate where to start. So once you know the clinical pictures of each of the heavy metals, you know where to start. So let's say the patient has neurological symptoms, tics, twitches, you'd start by giving them copper chelate, because that's got copper. That's a copper symptom. Yeah?
It's got a bit of brain fog here, but
Which one do you need? Sorry, I'll have to come back to it because it's something to go on.
So, John, would you use a detox only a maximum of 2 heavy? Would you detox only a maximum of 2 heavy metals?
Yeah, because you want to know what the patient's reaction is to those drops. If you're doing too many things at once, you can't tell what's happening. And frankly, if a patient's been sick for 30 years, like that chronic fatigue patient, as soon as you make them feel worse, they're out the door. They won't come back. So you've got to go very slowly and carefully. And for anybody who's got mercury in the red, I would always start plussing the mercury chelation drops, because they're the most sensitive patients, and don't aggravate.
You would start with mercury. You would start with mercury first.
No, if I'm treating a patient who has mercury in the red on their liver scan, I would always start the mercury chelation drops diluted or plussed, because they are the most sensitive patients, and they'll aggravate more than the other ones. They'll aggravate. And mercury patient aggravations are nasty ones. Mercuries are very insidious. So remember I was talking about the octopus? Yes. It's mostly mercury that you find on the bottom of the sea. And it's holding on to all the little fish swimming on the surface of the sea. And the fish don't know they're being controlled. They're just swimming around happily. But as soon as they start to go down into the depths of the sea, they can't, because the octopus is holding them out to the periphery. This is what mercury does. So your minerals can't get into the organs where they're needed because of the mercury. So that octopus image is a very important one to understand once you start treating chronic mercury patients.
And at what point is it safe to have the mercury taken out of people's teeth?
If the patient is reasonably vital, they should do it over 2 years. 1 quadrant of the mouth every 6 months. With the proper precautions, proper rubber dam. Okay, if the patient is really unwell and aged, maybe they're in their 60s or the 70s and really unwell, just leave them there. Just leave them there. Even though they're still getting more mercury, you can still, it's not the mercury that's being released, it's the mercury that has been released over their 60 years of life is the problem. That's found its way into their endocrine system. That's the mercury that's the problem. The stuff that's released here isn't as big a deal as what's already there. So just leave it there. The last thing you want is, with those patients is for them to feel more sick. And removal of the amalgams might do that. Alright, so 15 cases of Hashimoto's. So 13 of them all had that same pattern. It's a pretty amazing thing, isn't it? 13 different patients had the same problem with their toxicities and their deficiencies. So we can really say, even though this is fairly early work, you'd agree, right? we can see the answers for thyroid disease really clearly.
Are they all Australians?
Yes, they're all Australians. Well, they all live in Australia, yes.
I just wondered if it would make any difference from a different country.
Well, the New Zealand practitioners are going to tell me. So I'm in regular communication with the biotrace people in Auckland, and we're getting feedback from them. And later in the year I'm presenting in Japan. I'm going to go and talk to the Japanese about iodine. So I'm going to get feedback from them about their thyroid things over there. So the more of us who get involved in using a liver scan in clinic, the more of a community there is, and the more we will learn about things like endocrine diseases. I think I've reached the end. Treatment summary: remineralize the patient at the same time that you detoxify. Very important. This is the mistake I made early in my practice. I tried to get that mercury out without attending to the nutritive elements. You've got to do both at the same time, otherwise the patient won't get better. Remove the toxicity and remineralize. It's like the space taken up by the bad guys has to be filled up straight away by the good guys. Otherwise, the patient doesn't recover. All right, so we've been through all those. Yep. I think we're at the end. All right.
Can you just leave those doses and that?
Back.
Or is it in your book?
You're going to get the
You'll get the PowerPoint slides. Yeah.
PowerPoints emailed to you.
I think I have to finish up because
Big boss lady.
the boss lady is approaching. Thank you.
Thank you, John.